Okay, I think we can get started. So, welcome to the round 5 information session for sort of the fifth iteration of CTED's General Grant RFP. It's very similar to what we've done the last few years. I know many of you in the audience have gone through this process before, so hopefully this will seem pretty familiar. Those of you who are new to the process, welcome, and we greatly appreciate your questions, your interest in the opportunities, and we look forward to helping you build some really interesting proposals. So the main purpose of the RFP is it's to award research grants. We send these out once a year, traditionally it used to be in the spring. Lately, it's been more in the fall to coincide with the setup process leading to projects generally start in January, February, give or take, but we're a little flexible with the individual timelines. The projects are led by full-time faculty, usually traditional teaching faculty, but we do have some research faculty, some postdocs. We have a pretty interesting group of lead PIs. The main PI is almost always a tenured or tenure track faculty member. That's not a requirement, it's a recommendation, but we have had projects run, again, by postdocs at many institutions. We often recommend a tenured or tenure track faculty have a prominent position because there are many issues of budgeting and paperwork and interacting with your Office of Sponsored Projects, and oftentimes a tenured faculty member might have more experience with sort of the bureaucracy of universities and grant funding. But we encourage a good team on many of these projects. We award these grants to participants from our 5 CTED consortium members. That's University of Texas at Arlington, the University of South Florida, the University of Wisconsin at Madison, Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and Georgia Tech University. Now that is to say, we do occasionally have a project where the lead faculty member is at one of these 5 schools, but then they can have a partner or a consultant from outside the consortium who's at another university. We take those on a case-by-case basis, but we do try to be flexible with your teams to help you get the best people lined up to lead your projects. Really, a very critical part here is that we want the grants to adhere to our research goals, to focus on what CTED's mission is and continues to be, which is we're a transportation research center, and specifically we look at issues of equity, policy, decision-making, finance. So we really prefer to fund projects that are under that umbrella of topics and themes. We see a great many very interesting proposals from other parts of transportation that don't necessarily touch on what we do here. And it's always a little heartbreaking to have to tell people that they're very intelligent, they're asking great questions, but we need it to match our focus areas. That's the purpose of CTED, is to advance these specific research areas. And we really like to see research that can be easily transmitted into practice, to where your research from the start has partnerships and connections with the community, so that there are stakeholders who can take your results and put them to work right away. We see these issues of equity and finance as very urgent in the transportation world, and the sooner we can get things out into the realm of practice, the more productive we think the research is. So CTED has 6 general focus areas. I won't spend too much time on these individually, but as you can see, they're somewhat broad and they encompass different areas of transportation equity and transportation studies. Some of them are very qualitative, very policy driven, such as focus area 6 and maybe 2. But then a few of them are very technical and employ things like big data or maintenance and research into infrastructure funding. So there's room among these 6 focus areas for a wide array of transportation projects, and we hope to find a place for each of you, and we encourage you to look through the focus areas and find a way to define your project so that it encompasses or at least touches on multiple focus areas. Those are often the strongest proposals, are ones that can bridge several of these conceptual ideas and bring it all together in an interesting way. So the proposal packet, which there's a sort of an instructional packet that's online on the CTEDD website. And if you'd like an additional copy, please feel free to email me directly. I can send it to you. It's pretty clearly defined as far as what should go in each section. It looks pretty similar to a lot of other proposals through the UTC program or some of the NSF proposals. Everything has a page limit or a section limit. We'd like it to not exceed 20 pages. That's generally not been a problem. People are usually pretty good at adhering to that, but we would like to keep it to around 20 pages so that we can more efficiently send it out for review. These proposals are reviewed by anywhere from 5 to 8 people before a decision is made, and we'd like it to be as straightforward as possible. The budget, item number 2, is often an area of complication for PIs because we have a template that we tried to make pretty user-friendly, but with federally funded research and sponsored research, there are often many rules attached to what can go in each category and how things like indirect costs are calculated and at what rate. So with that, we require that your budget, ideally, you and your team would prepare the budget, but it must be vetted by your Office of Sponsored Projects, Office of Grants and Contracts, and they would help you make sure that everything is as it should be and everything is calculated properly. It's also a great chance to get to know those individuals in those offices. They're an invaluable resource for anyone looking to get funding for their research. So it's a good way to get to know people if you don't already know them. Number 3 is an area that we've expanded lately, which is the match commitment letters. In your budget, because your proposal is required to propose a certain amount of match funding, 50% at least, traditionally that would come from your host university through a match of faculty time or in-kind resources. But we've opened that up recently to also encourage people to seek either direct funding or in-kind support, things like data sharing or equipment sharing with stakeholders in the community, with a state department of transportation, for example, or a city government. But whoever is providing match in whatever form, whether it's your department chair or a state department of transportation, any of your financial commitments or non-financial commitments, we need there to be a letter documenting that. That's often a thing that can slow down a proposal, is that if those letters are missing, because we can't technically count it as match until we have a signed letter confirming it. And that's something I'm happy to help people with as the process goes along. And an additional part that we've added over the years, in addition to the commitment of funding and resources, there's also the issue of stakeholder commitment letters. And in your proposal on the initial, I believe it's the very first page, we ask you to list the community stakeholders that you will be working with. And these are people who either while your project is in process or after it's finished and you have a finished product to hand off, we'd like you to identify some of those community stakeholders and list their contact information and provide some sort of a commitment letter from them that would be attached to your proposal, letting us know that they know who you are and that they have communicated with you and that they're interested in your findings. They're part of your team, so to speak. For example, it's one thing to have a proposal that suggests that maybe when you're finished, you might have something interesting for Uber to work with. It's one thing to put that in a proposal, but it's another to actually have a letter from Uber that says they have heard of you, they're interested in your work, and they are very interested in applying your findings. So that's an important part too, is just strengthening those links between researchers and community practitioners. And I can provide templates of what those letters should look like or how deep or formal they should be. The document itself, as I said, everything should hopefully be pretty clearly labeled. We don't see a whole lot of questions about the format. Everything's pretty set up as a pretty straightforward template. But as long as you adhere generally to the length instructions, that would really help us out a great deal. It just keeps everything organized and tidy so that we can quickly find the information that we might need. And I can come back to this later in the question period if necessary. And now for technology transfer, I'd like to hand things over to CTEDD's Associate Director, I want to say for technology transfer, Dr. Eileen Clements from UT Arlington.
Hi, James. Thank you very much. Yes, so my name is Eileen Clements. I'm one of the assistant directors for technology transfer. Each one of the partner institutions has a T2 assistant director. From South Florida, USF is Phil Winters. From Georgia Tech is Carrie Watkins. From Wisconsin at Madison is Carrie McAndrews. And Cal Poly is Neil Hockaday. So each of them, if you do have questions about technology transfer and how it pertains to your project, you can reach out to those individuals on your campus, or of course to me as well. So just as a brief mention about technology transfer and why it's important, I've been with CTEDD for about the past year and a half in this area. And when I was first started with the organization, it was a newer initiative to be able to incorporate technology transfer in the proposals, to have that focus. And that's become a very important area that DOT is interested in. And it's really just about making sure that the technology and the policies and the work that the research that our investigators are doing are truly going to make an impact in society. And some of it might be more near term than others, but overall they should all have a focus on this. In the RFP, there is a section that is defined as technology transfer. And in fact, it was listed just previously on that outline that James showed. And it's called Technology Transfer and Stakeholder Collaboration Plan. So it kind of ties together this idea of who are your stakeholders, how are you engaging with them, because that will help show how you plan to do technology transfer and how you will make that an important part of your proposal. So as the document states that tech transfer is the process by which the technology or research products are translated from the lab to society. The goal for T2 is to enable the technology or those research products to be adopted by a stakeholder who will implement them, and that can then lead to positively impacting a group in society. And so it ties in these outcomes, these outputs, outcomes, and impacts that are also mentioned in the proposal that are very, very important to highlight. Some things that we have here about technology transfer and what we're looking for in the proposals is that the starting point of the technologies is we're looking for something that's at about a readiness level 3. And in fact, I think the next slide actually shows some of these tech transfer levels. James, do you mind popping forward one slide? Thank you. So this is from DOT, and this is also a pretty standard breakdown of technology readiness level, that scale, across a lot of development. It kind of starts at these early basic research where you could have something at TRL 1, 2, or 3 from a basic research. You have developed basic principles and have done some basic research in that. You've moved to the application being formulated, and you've started to do a proof of concept on that. Moving to the next stage of TRL 4 or 5, where you're looking more at the applied research, where 5 you can see has integrated the components into a laboratory environment and demonstrate it in that environment. Moving up even further in development to 6, 7, and 8, where there's more development done in relevant environments or operational environments, proven in operational environments, and 9, where it's really ready to be adopted. It's been fully tested and vetted, and it can be adopted. Thank you, James. Can you go back to the previous slide, please? Thank you. So in the proposal, we talk about the technology readiness level and wanting the PIs to explain where they're starting at the start of the project and where they're intending the TRL to get to by the end of the project, by the end of the duration. And we're, like I said, we're looking for things that are at least starting around the level of 3. There might be some wiggle room there, but that also emphasizes how we are looking for things that can move closer towards being adopted and implemented by a stakeholder. Part of this then is also, of course, the stakeholders and providing those letters that James already mentioned. Looking at T2 across the whole development cycle, from the proposal, the research that you're doing, what can happen post-research and how it can get implemented. And then also noted that if you are looking at things that can be at a TRL of 6 or above, perhaps you can also break that down into phases and perhaps propose a slightly longer timeline. And that can be just case dependent on your project and what might make the most sense. And we'd be happy to talk about that if you have any questions. I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks, James. Hello?
Yes, Eileen, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Clements. Keeping with the concept of the stakeholders, it's a part of growing importance in federally funded research, and we were a little nervous about it when we first started instituting it, but we found that it made the projects more colorful, more interesting, and the PIs seem to really enjoy the extra degree of connection with their community. So it's been really successful so far. But as you can see, item 6 in the proposal is listing some stakeholder information. We ask that anything you list be matched with a letter, some sort of documentation showing that that person, that contact, has heard of you, that they have some input on your project. And then from there, I think that the most important part is, if you see in the boxes on the right, the lower box that says stakeholders' contribution to the project. They can contribute in many ways. It can be something as simple as sharing a data set from 3 years ago, or giving you weekly phone calls about something, or if they're maybe a consultant, they could chip in on one part of the process. It's important to show the ways in which they're contributing. And it can be almost anyone. Private companies or transit agencies, nonprofits are always a really good stakeholder. They don't have to provide money. In fact, it's very, very rare that we see projects with stakeholders that provide money. It's usually in-kind support of some kind. Or it can be the promise that when your project is done, that they will be the first person to receive your deliverables and that they hope to do something with it in the future. We would consider that stakeholder engagement too, as long as it's documented. The budgets, this can be an area of delay or complication just because there are so many moving parts with a budget. But we generally fund a window of between 65 and 200,000 per project. That's not to say everyone will get $200,000. Your budget must be, precisely justified and organized, and we sometimes adjust budgets upward or downward based on what needs to happen. We often tend to give funding priority to projects with a larger or more diverse team. We do have many projects that have a single PI at one institution, but those tend to be smaller and cheaper projects. But the larger ones that are on 2 or 3 campuses simultaneously they justifiably get larger budgets because they have more students to hire, more research to conduct. And we would like to really see PIs budget at least 50% of their staff expenses for student researchers. So when you count up your staff budget, which is your PIs, as well as your students and postdocs, anyone else, we'd like at least 50% of that total number to be for your students, to cover their tuition, their wages, their health insurance. This was a priority before, but it's especially a priority for our federal sponsor during COVID. They want to make sure that students are given ample opportunity to stay in school and maintain their visa eligibility or their graduate eligibility. So we really hope that you could develop budgets that prioritize your students and also your postdocs count in that over faculty members who are already on a salary. We get a lot of questions about travel, obviously not this year, but in general, there's a line on the budget for travel, but this being federally funded research, that should be reserved for research-related travel that you need to take to gather your data or conduct your analysis. It's not the same as conference travel, so please don't put that in your budget. We have a great many budgets that we have to alter because of conference travel. CTED has funding available for conference travel, but there's a separate process if you would like assistance with that. But obviously for the remainder of 2020 and possibly into 2021, doesn't seem like anyone's going anywhere in person. Another issue that comes up a lot is durable equipment, as the government calls it. These are, pieces of lab equipment or computers, furniture, things that will last beyond the life of your project. And it's very difficult to get approval for that. We often will fund more disposable supplies, things that you will use up over the life of your project, the 1-year timeline or so. But if it's something that will still exist after your project is done and that you might then use for other research down the road, we have to get very special permission to do that, and it's complicated and they often say no. So we discourage budget requests for durable equipment. But if you cannot do your project without it, and we've exhausted all alternatives, we can maybe investigate it, start the process, but we try to ask people to not put durable equipment on their budgets because in most cases we can't fund it. The 50% match from your host university or from your match partners is the minimum. You can provide more. Many of our PIs are able to cobble together more than 50%. It's nice to see. That won't necessarily improve your chances of getting approval. Proposals are reviewed through a peer review process, and that is generally how we make the decision, is how strong the research potential is. So this isn't to say that we're more likely to give you funding if you find budget. That's not it. It's just to encourage you to reach out to community stakeholders. I've seen many proposals that, because the PIs have deep connections with community stakeholders, they are actually able to get some match funding. And it's nice when you can get it, but we don't require it. But it does need to be at least 50%. So I hope that's not too unclear. With the proposal document, we also have the budget template as an Excel sheet, and I can forward that to anyone who needs it. It should be filled in as an adjustable template, but it needs to be in this format for our review process. And we don't usually have any issues with that. It's a pretty straightforward form, but please do stick to the template. As you can see, it has the items lined up by category, and please do remember to calculate your tuition for your student assistants, GRAs. At our consortium member universities, if a student is employed on your project as a research assistant, their tuition must also be documented as well. And please do that in advance so we don't have to go back and make an adjustment later. That every student assistant also has a tuition that is either funded through the grant that we provide or funded through your match source. Everything on the budget sheet, as you'll see, there's a column for what you'd like the grant to fund and a column for what you'd like your match to fund. The stakeholder commitment letters, they're pretty brief, as you can see, and I can provide templates as you need. But it essentially just says that the given stakeholder, by the letterhead on the top of the letter, agrees to provide a source of match funding or maybe raw data for your project, or they'll lend you some equipment to use, whatever it may be. It should be on the letterhead, obviously, of the person giving it. It should be signed by someone in authority. These are usually signed by a department chair or a dean, depending on your university system. But we do need to have those, otherwise we can't calculate your match unless it's documented and signed. And it's also a chance for you to let your department chair know that you're doing this research. It's always good to tell them you're seeking external funding. So as we make the decision, it's a layered decision process. As I said, it's mainly driven by peer review and input of the potential impacts of the research. But we do look for specific things in our own internal process as we go through it. We like to prioritize projects that involve junior or untenured faculty. We have a lot of rock stars amongst our PIs, but we also have a lot of people who are just starting out, and this is very beneficial to their careers, and we're happy to help. We like projects that prioritize student training, that not only employ them on a project, but hopefully give the students unique skills that they can then take into a graduate career. We like to see interdisciplinary or diverse collaboration efforts amongst multiple departments or multiple disciplines. Transportation is a very diverse field, and we think there's room for all sorts of experts. As Dr. Clements mentioned, the TRL levels, that is a factor that we consider. We ask you to self-identify, but then we also evaluate based on your proposal where that all fits. And finally, the DOT as well as CTEDD like to see projects that involve underrepresented populations. That's people of color, women faculty, and these are some factors among many. We also have our much longer list of internal evaluation criteria, and this is in addition to what the peer reviewers comment. Each proposal is given to 2 peer reviewers, sometimes as many as 4 if we need extra expertise. And those are made up of either faculty or often industry people who can address the specifics of your project. But we also look for whether the proposal fits CTEDD's objectives and goals. Does it advance things like equity and policy in transportation? Does it prioritize students? Does it have a justified and appropriate budget? Is the research relevant nationally? Is it something that affects only one community, or can it be translated to the nation or even the world? Ideally, everyone's research would be that transformative, but we know how that goes sometimes. Does it reach the required TRL levels and propose a viable tech transfer plan? This is a newer element to federally funded research, but it's very important that research and people leading the teams start to conceptualize their projects, not just in terms of how many papers they could publish or maybe a chapter in a book, but also non-traditional outlets. Like, is it something that could be patented, or is it something that could be given to a nonprofit to help make transportation a little bit better in your community? So it's a new way of thinking for a lot of our PIs, but they've been very adaptable so far. We're very proud of them that they've been able to take this new idea and actually produce some really interesting tech transfer out of it. And the last item, which we don't consider too much, but it is one factor among many, is if you've gotten funding through us before, what is that existing relationship like? You know, we have quarterly reports with the projects, and are you someone who submits your quarterly reports? Do you keep in touch and let us know how your research is going? That's one thing we consider, because we do give a lot of not exactly follow-up grants, but we give sometimes grants over multiple years to an experienced group of people. So we have some people we're quite familiar with. But we also have a lot of new people and new faces, and we're always pleased to see those as well. So as you can see, it's a lot of factors that go into it, but again, the dominant decision factor is the peer review and the research's potential to inform scholarship and practice. The peer reviewer, we give them a detailed rubric, and it goes over issues like intellectual merit, innovation, its broader impacts, the qualifications of the team, and you can feel free to go back and look at these in more detail if you'd like. The dates, which are a very important part. The proposals have to be submitted. Please don't send them directly to me or to CTEDD. They have to go through your university's Office of Grants and Contracts or Office of Sponsored Research, and they will submit them to us, but that gives them the chance to double check all the figures and all the rules in place. The deadline for that is October 10th. Usually it's either the close of business or 11:59 p.m. on October 10th. Oh, some questions? Yes, we'll do the questions at the end, but I will keep track of those. So yes, October 10th is the deadline. As soon as we get them in, usually the next day we send them right back out for peer review. And that process ideally would be done before, then that gives us the month, sort of the end of November and the month of December. We will let people know. We let everyone know whether you received funding or did not. We don't leave you in the dark. And then that gives plenty of time so that we can set up what they call task orders or notice of award documents, so that recipients of grants can start their projects January of 2021. And as a reminder, the things that you send to your Office of Sponsored Research that they would send to us, it's usually a zipped file or even one long document if you're able to. The proposal document, the 20-page document with the subheadings filled in, the budget, it should be an Excel sheet. Sometimes people paste their Excel sheet in as a JPEG, and that's harder for us to read. So sometimes we request it to be its own Excel file. And the match letters and stakeholder commitment letters, those can take time to get. When we first started requiring those last year, that was a point of delay for a lot of PIs, because you have to ask other people to write a letter on your behalf, and sometimes that takes longer than you hope. But we do ask that it be in by the deadline of October 10th. And hopefully between now and then, that gives you ample time to get any questions answered, work out any issues. And we're happy to help, because this is a main part of what CTEDD does every year. So we're happy to help in any way we can. And if it's late, we won't be able to send it out. We don't usually have an issue with late proposals. Usually PIs are very diligent about their time, and we really appreciate that. And again, I'll reiterate, it can't come directly from the PI. When you've got it ready, you should send it through your sponsored projects or grants and contracts office, and they will send it to us. They need to be made aware of it from the start so that they can justify the budgets and enter it into their system internally. And that's the case at all universities, including UTA. Can I run through the FAQs and then I can address actually, let's do that the other way. Maybe I'll answer questions people have put in first, and then we'll do the FAQs. So Eileen, maybe this first question could be for you.
Sure. So the first question is for category 9. Does it mean that it will go for, does it mean that it goes for patenting? So good question. Patenting of a technology can happen at various technology readiness levels. It just depends, but the best judge of that is going to be each of your individual tech transfer offices. They might all have different names, but each university has a group. At UTA, it's the Innovation and Commercialization Office. But there's quite a few technologies that even early on, once you have a proof of concept, or I should say a prototype, that you can at least submit paperwork for a patent application, et cetera. But that usually happens in discussion with your tech transfer offices. And so they're going to be the best ones to talk about that. I would say from CTEDD's perspective, we don't have any requirements about patenting, and we don't have anything specific that says once you get to X stage that you would be doing something with patenting. I think that's going to be something that is more between you and your universities. But if you do patent, I think those are some very good results that can be noted and highlighted and certainly reported. But the technology transfer is also looking at specifically those outcomes and impacts that they'll have with the community and with your stakeholders, which may be separate, and from a patent, it may not even involve a patent. If that didn't answer the question, please, you can reach out to me. I'll be happy to talk with you further about that. James, do you want me to tackle the second one too?
Yeah, I think that one's pretty similar from Dr.
Okay.
Islam.
So the question is wondering if is there a framework to evaluate the ratings for TRL category, because PI or CoPIs evaluation process might be different than the standard evaluation of the TRL category. Any insights would be helpful. So what I will say is there's information that we've linked to in that RFP that talk about that technology readiness level and how to rate your particular research. Some people are more technology driven, some people are more policy driven. There's a wide variety, and so each person has to take their own look at those rating scales and the explanation that's there from DOT. And based on what you've done with your development, with your research, you can state, here's where we are starting, and here's why you're saying that, and here's where we believe we're going to end, and here's why we're saying that. What will the policy or the technology or the research look like at that point? We read that and we take that, we review it, and we will still make our own review of that and say, well, they said they're at a 3, but we see that maybe as a 4. And so we take that into consideration. I don't want people to be too worried about that. What we're really looking for is your honest assessment of where your technology is in terms of the concept development, the prototyping, the testing, and same with the policy is the discussions with the stakeholders. How thought out has the policy been made? Things along those lines. So we trust that everyone will be able to look at those references for technology readiness level and make a best assessment of your own situation. And we will take that, we will review all of your information that you put in your technology transfer plan in your proposal and take all of that into consideration. James?
Yes, and one thing to add on to that, I know many of you are very technical people from an engineering background or a systems background. For example, I am not. I am an urban planner in a qualitative area. So for me, the tech transfer stuff was initially very intimidating because policy research or human factors research may not seem like it fits the T2 framework, but it just requires a bit of imagination. And as Dr. Clements said, the Office of Commercialization or Innovation, whatever it might be called at your university, they're a great resource. Also, each of the 5 campuses has a T2 representative, a faculty member who sort of keeps abreast of these issues and can help you navigate this for CTED's purposes. But for example, if you're a policy researcher, you might not have a patent at the end of your project, but you might still have a guidebook, or at USF, we've seen the templates for how to run a more efficient public meeting or how to make communications multilingual using an app or using a pretty simple technology. So there are many, many ways to move your research along the tech transfer ladder. And please don't be discouraged if it sounds too technical, because there's room for projects of all kinds in tech transfer. And we're happy to help in any way we can. And feel free to type in more questions to the chat if you'd like, but I can go over some of the FAQs while we wait. One question we get a lot of is, how can we find CoPIs or stakeholders? And this is an issue of networking and growing your research. It's a common thought among PIs in all disciplines. And generally, the traditional methods we find work pretty well, which is talking to people, your department colleagues, people across your university, paying attention to newsletters and listservs. For community stakeholders, that's generally, it depends on your community, but I always recommend looking at your local governments and local nonprofits that do what you do. My research, when I was a researcher before I came to CTED, was in older adult transportation. And I often worked with nonprofits who did elder care services. And it took a while to forge those formalized ties, but I realized that those community stakeholders have a lot of resources that they're happy to share. And it makes research much more colorful, much more robust. But we recommend asking around, communicating about your research interests, and finding a way for someone else to join on to one dimension of your research. We see projects that start out as civil engineering or systems engineering, but then they add a social work faculty member who they just happen to know socially. And then the project takes on a whole new dimension and goes in a whole new direction of dealing with humans. And it makes research more interesting. We love to see projects like that that can take off in many directions. So we really encourage you to communicate. Each campus of the CTED 5 they have an executive committee representative who can help you with this. There's also your tech transfer reps, your department chairs, section heads. We really just encourage people to keep an eye out for anything related to their topic. The next question, how far ahead can we phase out our research in terms of number of years, number of stages? If we plan a multi-phase project, what does CTED consider necessary for the first phase? So this is often because CTED-funded projects are generally 12 months, or they can be as much as 15 or 18 months, but they're traditionally just within 1 year or so. And sometimes you might have a project that to fully do it justice would take many years. And because we run on a roughly 12-month cycle, we cannot guarantee funding beyond the initial phase. So if your project has 2 phases, for example, if we award phase 1, that's no guarantee that we will be able or willing to fund phase 2. We would ask you to come back again and apply a second time. And also, for this particular RFP, CTED is coming up to its the end of its initial grant will be in 2022. So if a project starts in January of 2021, we would need it to finish by about the summer of 2022 so that everything is wound down and tied up by the end of the initial CTED grant. We are seeking renewal. We're hoping to be around another 5 or 6 years beyond that, but at any rate, we would need a project to fit to its timeline. And we're interested in multi-phase work. We don't give a blanket no to multi-phase projects, but we're only able to fund them one stage at a time, and that you would have to come back and apply for supplemental funding for the second phase. The next question is, can we have non-tenured faculty as PIs, or is it necessary to have a more experienced PI and for the less experienced person to be a secondary junior partner? We've had many projects where the lead PI or even the sole PI was a postdoc or very junior faculty. We don't require the lead to be a tenured faculty, but we do recommend it, that you have a senior person somewhere on your team just to help with mentorship and help with advocating for your project. And they are your elders, your experienced colleagues. They have a lot that they could help you with. So we really encourage that they be somewhere on your leadership team as a co-PI at least. They don't have to be the lead. The lead PI just needs to be of faculty rank or postdoc rank. It cannot be a graduate student, for example. Are proposals considered from other areas of transportation research, such as econometrics, vehicle safety, emissions? Generally, broadly speaking, no. We see many proposals from those other elements of transportation, and while they're very interesting and very worthwhile, we encourage those projects to go through, for example, a UTC that studies emissions. They exist, and there are UTCs that study vehicle safety. And CTED focuses mainly on equity, decision-making, and dollars and finance. Now, that doesn't mean it's a blanket no, because you could take a project in this topic and then find a dimension that fits with our 6 focus areas, in which case, then we would consider it. We've seen projects on a wider range of individual topics that have been funded. It's about how well the authors can propose to fit it within those focus areas and within our mission. Last one is, what kind of budget items are non-allowable? Can we include travel for technology transfer, or would that be a separate project, budget phase? So non-allowable items, luckily we don't run into this too much, because the type of research we conduct doesn't touch on those categories too much. I mentioned it previously. A big item that comes up is durable equipment. That's a big one that is non-allowable. We also have topics that come up less often, such as international travel. That is generally not allowable, not feasible. Issues like if part of your data collection involves gathering people together and rewarding them with some sort of gift card or cash prize or door prize, those are a bit tricky. There's often a lot of things there that are non-allowable. The purchase of alcohol with taxpayer dollars is not allowable. If you're planning to have a lunch or a party or something, please don't use federal money to do it. And then as far as technology transfer funding, that's often a separate phase where if you advance your project up the ladder, as you say, and then you achieve that point, but then you wish to come back and request additional funding to move it a little farther. For example, if you have a concept in mind, but you might like additional funding to actually go through the patent process, then that would be a separate funding request. And those are examined on an individual basis. If an individual requests funding, that would be a whole separate process, but that's usually where they would contact us directly and we would communicate over the budget for that. But some technology transfer is allowable within your budget. For example, if your main tech transfer item is a guidebook and you would like to budget a few $100s to print up copies of it and hand them out to a city council, that would be allowable within your main project budget. But if you have any specific questions, which is usually what those are, please reach out to myself or maybe Dr. Clements, and we can help you decide where that would fit in your budget. Dr. Islam has a new question. We try to publish a paper, which is sometimes time-taking, or present at a conference at the end of a project. What is your suggestion on this? Do you suggest to do the process earlier, before the end of the project deadline? Also, the implementation phase is not incorporated in the traditional budget or task time chart. So yeah, this brings up a good point that every project proposal has a timeline where we ask you to sketch out your project timeline from start to finish. The presenting of conference papers and publishing of papers, we don't see too many PIs who build that into their funded project timeline. We traditionally fund the gathering and analysis of data, but the separate process of synthesizing that into preparing a paper, that's generally done during the project itself or afterward as a separate process. We generally don't fund that as a specific goal to where maybe you would like 3 or 6 months funding to hire a few graduate students to prepare a few papers. We generally don't fund that as an individual item. And the implementation phase, maybe Dr. Clements could speak more specifically to that, but it depends on the project and what is being implemented as to whether that fits within the budget or if that is a separate request. Eileen, did you have anything to add for that?
Sure. For the implementation phase, and this may vary because some folks may not actually get their developments to that phase within the project duration. But so the question, implementation phase is not incorporated in the traditional budget. I think it just depends on the project, though, that if as you're progressing or you're at a stage where you can incorporate it because it's within the year or something, it's not something that would happen in 3 years, then perhaps it can be included. I think it just depends on the particular project, what it would take to actually do it, how that is described. That may be a very specific question that we can talk to individual PIs about as they're developing their proposal to see what could stay within the scope or might be beyond. James?
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, thank you very much. And that, Dr. Clements said it right. It's usually, for most of the PIs we see, they're able to accomplish some of the implementation within their timeline. But if you have a specific concern about that or depend on your specific outputs, you can always build that into your proposal timeline when you send in the proposal. And if we have any specific concerns about that or questions for your individual project, we would then communicate with you about that. But usually we've seen people able to accomplish quite a lot within their stated time frame, but it does not have to be precisely 12 months. If you think it would be better as a 15-month project and you can explain that and justify that in your timeline, then feel free to do so. We're happy to entertain it. And we do review these for issues like that. So with your timeline, you could either show us your specific example as you're preparing the proposal, or you could just simply put it in the proposal and we'll give feedback if there's an issue. But we try to find ways to work with people. We trust your judgment on how much time your team might need to implement something. So we'll work with you as best as we can. Were there any additional questions? And I'm always available to answer questions, and as our director, Dr. Rosenberger, and Dr. Clements, our T2 lead. And you have your resources on campus as well as our website. So anything we can do to help with this process, or, oh, there is a question from Dr. Najafi. Do you allow us to modify the proposal after review? So that's a good question. As soon as we receive the proposals, we internally, we give them a glance and see if there's something missing or a critical error that maybe something needs to be explained or is miscalculated. If it's something large and critical, we can send it back to the PI and ask that they please very quickly make a correction. But beyond, usually they were well, in that case, if I miss anyone, I do apologize, and I'm always around to answer questions and help you with this process. But anything I can do to help is always good. I've listed our emails. The main one is CTEDD@UTA. That routes to me, and I believe also to our director. You can email me directly or Dr. Rosenberger. Dr. Clements and your T2 reps are not listed here, but they're listed on our CTEDD website, which was recently redesigned. Feel free to take a look. Also, even if you're not seeking formal input from your department chair, from your T2 representatives, it's always good to let them know that you're sending in a proposal. They like to be aware of those things, and they'll try to help you out if they can, because most of them have been through this process directly, and they could give you tips and information, and they like to know who's doing what on the faculty. So please do keep your campus CTEDD representatives informed of what you're working on, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing your proposals. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. That's what we're here for. So thank you very much, and good luck with your proposals.